Daniel was a man in his late 40s who had recently experienced a dramatic shift in his life. Years ago, he had lived in the bustling city of Las Vegas with his late wife, Sophie, in a home they had worked hard to build together. But after Sophie's untimely passing, Daniel found himself back in his hometown, a small and quiet town, where he had the chance to reconnect with his family and old friends. Since returning to his roots, Daniel had taken up a job at a local factory. It wasn't his dream job, far from it, but it paid the bills, and with no other viable options, he had no choice but to stick with it. Daniel's lifelong dream had always been to open his own clothing business. He had often pictured himself running one of the biggest clothing stores in his town. Unfortunately, without the financial means to make it happen, he had given up on that dream years ago. Aside from his factory job, Daniel also worked nights at a local KFC. The extra hours helped him make ends meet and gave him a small sense of financial security. It wasn't much, but it kept him afloat. One rainy night, as Daniel was returning from his shift at KFC, he noticed a woman in her early 30s standing by the side of the road. She was soaked from the rain, and her clothes clung to her as she desperately tried to hitchhike. Daniel immediately felt a pang of sympathy for her. It was almost 10 p.m., and that stretch of road was usually desolate at night. There weren't many people driving down that road, especially not in the pouring rain. But since it was the quickest route home, Daniel passed by it every night without fail. At first, Daniel considered just driving past the woman. After all, it wasn't his responsibility to help a stranger in the middle of nowhere. But then, as he thought about how she might be stranded there all night with no one to help her, he pulled over. He rolled down the passenger window and called out to her. "I'm sure you need a ride," Daniel said, his voice soft, yet full of genuine concern. The woman, shivering from the cold, nodded gratefully. Daniel reached over, opened the passenger door, and gestured for her to get in. As she climbed into the truck, he handed her a small towel he kept in the glove compartment. It wasn't much, but it would help her dry off a little. "Thank you for your kindness," she said, smiling warmly as she took the towel. "I'm Laura," she introduced herself. "I'm Daniel," he replied with a smile of his own. "So what happened? What are you doing out here at this time of night?" Laura hesitated for a moment before responding. "My car broke down and I couldn't do anything about it. I had to walk to find help. I'll have it fixed tomorrow." "Your car?" Daniel asked, puzzled. "I didn't see a car anywhere. I had to leave it behind to get help," Laura explained. "I'll get it fixed tomorrow, though." Daniel nodded, understanding that sometimes things didn't go as planned. "Okay, so where are you headed?" he asked, shifting the conversation to lighter topics. "I'm going to my friend's house on Purple Pine Street," Laura said. "I'm just going to spend the night there and then take care of my car in the morning." "Not too far from where I live," Daniel said, reassuring her. "I live on Portland Street. Do you mind if I play some music?" Daniel asked as he reached for the radio. "Since I can't offer you coffee, the least I can do is play you something nice." Laura nodded, smiling at his gesture. Daniel turned the dial to a popular music station, and the soft sound of a familiar song filled the truck. It was one of his late wife Sophie's favorite songs. As the music played, memories of Sophie flooded Daniel's mind, and for a moment, he felt a mix of sadness and warmth. "This used to be one of my wife's favorite songs," Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of loss. "I played it for her on the day she passed away. Now, every time I hear it, it reminds me of how much I miss her." Laura, sensing his grief, reached over and gently placed a hand on his arm. "Tell me about her," she said softly, urging him to share. And so, Daniel began to talk about Sophie, how they had met in college, the love they shared, and how she had become such an integral part of his life. He spoke of the heartbreak of losing her so suddenly to illness, and how it had left him with a deep sense of emptiness. Laura listened intently, offering words of comfort and reassurance as he spoke. "You know," Laura said after a while, "your wife is in heaven, watching over you, and I'm sure she will want you to find peace again." Hearing those words, Daniel felt a small weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time that night, he felt a sense of calm in his heart. "Enough about me," Daniel said, wanting to turn the conversation away from his pain. Tell me about yourself, Laura. What brings you out here tonight? Laura smiled, her eyes twinkling. No, Daniel. I enjoy listening to you. Maybe next time I'll tell you about me. Daniel was confused by her answer, but didn't press. He just shrugged and continued sharing details of his life. How he had moved back to his hometown after Sophie's passing, and why he had settled into the life he had now. He figured that Laura didn't want to talk about herself, and he understood that. After all, not everyone was comfortable sharing personal details with a stranger. As the conversation continued, Daniel found himself growing more comfortable with Laura. It was a rare opportunity for him to talk openly, and for once, he wasn't alone in his thoughts. About 15 minutes later, they reached Purple Pine Street. Laura was hesitant to tell Daniel exactly where her friend lived, opting instead to walk the rest of the way once he dropped her off. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, and the streetlights made the walk easier for Laura. Are you sure about this? Daniel asked one last time, concerned about her walking alone at night. I'll be fine, Laura reassured him, stepping out of the truck. Thank you again, Daniel. Take care. As she walked away, Daniel pulled away from the curb and made his way home. He arrived just before 10 p.m., exhausted from his long shift at KFC. After a quick dinner and a shower, he went to bed, looking forward to a rare morning of rest before his afternoon shift at the factory. The next morning, however, was anything but ordinary. The sun had barely risen when Daniel was awakened by a deafening noise. It was a sound he had never heard so close to home, loud and persistent. The sound of a helicopter hovering overhead rattled his windows and shook him from his sleep. Still in his pajamas, Daniel quickly sat up, his heart racing as the noise grew louder. He had no idea what was going on, but the first thing that crossed his mind was that something serious had happened. Groggy and confused, Daniel stumbled out of bed and rushed toward the front door, wondering what was happening. But before he could even step outside, there was a knock at the door. The timing was so strange. It was barely 10 a.m., and yet here was someone knocking on his door, probably amidst all the noise. His thoughts raced as he opened the door, half expecting some kind of emergency. Standing there was a man in a sharp black suit, looking as out of place as one could in this quiet little town. Behind him, 4 other men stood in the front yard, watching Daniel with an air of quiet authority. Daniel's first thought was, am I in trouble? But the man quickly reassured him. No, of course not, he said, his voice calm but firm. I'm here on behalf of Laura Smith. Laura Smith? Daniel repeated, trying to process the name. I don't think I know any Laura Smith, he added, growing more perplexed. The man didn't seem fazed by Daniel's confusion. Instead, he pulled a small picture out of his pocket, one that looked like a standard passport photo. He handed it to Daniel. The woman in the picture was none other than Laura, the woman he had given a ride to just the night before. But there was something unfamiliar about the name. I know this Laura, Daniel said, recognizing her face immediately. I just didn't know her as Laura Smith, he added with a slight chuckle, still unsure of what was happening. Is everything okay? Daniel asked, try to make sense of this bizarre situation. The man gave a small nod. Yes, everything is fine. Miss Laura is waiting for you. She'd love to see you if you don't mind. Wait, what? Miss Laura. Daniel's confusion deepened. He had no idea who this woman truly was. But if she wanted to see him, it was clear that she wasn't someone ordinary. Okay, I just need to change out these pajamas, Daniel said, trying to process everything that was happening so quickly. Of course, the man replied, giving him a respectful nod. Take your time. Still feeling a bit stunned, Daniel went back inside to change into something more presentable. He couldn't shake the feeling that something big was unfolding around him, but he didn't know what. The moment he was ready, the man led him outside, where the helicopter was waiting. Daniel had never been inside a helicopter before, and it felt surreal to see it parked in front of his house. He followed the man to the helicopter, where Laura was already seated. As Daniel climbed in and strapped himself in, he was handed a pair of headphones with a microphone attached. As soon as the helicopter lifted off the ground, Daniel turned to Laura, still trying to make sense of it all. Hello, Daniel. Laura said with a smile, her eyes sparkling. I knew we would meet again. Daniel still had a lot of questions, and his curiosity was piqued more than ever. Hello, Laura, he said, his voice full of wonder. This is quite a surprise. I don't even know where to start. I have so many questions. Laura smiled warmly. I know you must be wondering what's going on, but before I answer anything, how about we go on a short ride first? I promise to answer all of your questions, she said, her voice soothing and confident. Daniel didn't hesitate. That would be great, he said, his voice eager. This wasn't something he could have ever anticipated. His world had just been turned upside down by a simple act of kindness, and now, here he was flying a helicopter with a woman he had only met the night before. As the helicopter soared into the sky, Daniel's mind raced. This was no ordinary encounter, and he had no idea where it was all headed. But one thing was for certain. This was going to be a story that would change his life forever. So, my first question, Daniel began, his voice filled with curiosity. Who are you, really? And how do you have access to all these things? Are you with the FBI or something? Laura chuckled softly, a knowing smile on her face. No, not at all, she replied. My name is Laura Smith. I'm the only child and heir to Jonathan Smith. Daniel's eyes widened in surprise. Jonathan Smith? That name rang a bell. It was a name everyone in town knew. Jonathan Smith was a wealthy businessman, well known for his successful ventures, but more importantly, he was a highly respected figure. Daniel hadn't expected Laura to be connected to such a powerful family. Jonathan Smith? Daniel repeated, making sure he had heard her right. Yes, that Jonathan Smith, Laura confirmed with a smile. At this point, everything Daniel thought he knew was shifting. He couldn't quite understand why Laura, someone with such a high-profile family background, would be out in the rain, looking for a ride from a stranger. But as Laura continued speaking, it started to make sense. I've grown tired of people being nice to me just because of my name and status, Laura explained, her voice laced with sincerity. I wanted to see if there were still people out there who would treat me well, without knowing who I am. And you, Daniel, you proved to me that there are still good people in this world. Daniel was taken aback by her words. I don't even know what to say, he stammered. This is quite a surprise. Laura smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at him. I know what to say, Daniel. It's thank you. And because you were so kind to me last night, I have something for you. With that, one of the men sitting nearby opened a briefcase, and Laura pulled out a large brown envelope. She handed it to Daniel, who stared at it in disbelief. This was the last thing he had expected. As he opened the envelope, his eyes widened in shock. Inside were stacks of cash, far more than he had ever seen in his life. No, I can't take this, Daniel said, his voice trembling. It's too much. I was just helping a stranger. Laura shook her head, her expression kind yet firm. And that stranger is here to show you gratitude for your kindness, she said softly. Please accept it. Daniel hesitated, but then, seeing the sincerity in Laura's eyes, he took the envelope. Thank you so much, Laura, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You have no idea what this means to me. The helicopter ride was quiet for a moment as Daniel processed everything that had happened. He never imagined that his small act of kindness would lead to something so life-changing. As promised, the helicopter dropped him off in front of his house. Laura waved goodbye and told him she would check on him occasionally. With a final smile, she left, and the helicopter disappeared into the sky. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Daniel. He couldn't stop thinking about his encounter with Laura or the unexpected turn his life had taken. He had always dreamed of opening a clothing store, but the money Laura had given him, far more than he could ever imagine, had made that dream feel possible again. He had no idea why Laura had chosen him, a simple factory worker with no connections, to help, but he knew one thing for sure. This was his chance to change everything. Daniel wasted no time. He used the money to research the clothing business, learn about the logistics of running a store, and plan every step carefully. While his small town didn't have a bustling downtown area, there was potential. especially for a local clothing store that could cater to the community's needs. He didn't want to create just any store. He wanted to create a place where people could find quality clothes that suited their lifestyles. The more he thought about it, the more he knew this was what he had been meant to do all along. Despite the initial shock, Daniel found himself becoming more confident as he moved forward with his plans. He started by scouting locations and talking to local suppliers. His hard work at the factory and KFC had taught him the value of perseverance, and now he was putting that same determination into his business venture. Laura, as promised, checked in on him from time to time. She would send him occasional messages, asking how things were going and if he needed any help. It wasn't just about the money. Laura's genuine interest in his progress meant more to Daniel than he could express. She had given him the opportunity, but it was up to him to seize it, and he wasn't going to waste it. There were moments, of course, when Daniel doubted himself. Starting a business wasn't easy, especially in a town where many businesses struggled to stay afloat. But every time he felt discouraged, he would think back to the conversation he had with Laura in the helicopter, how she had spoken about wanting genuine connections and how she had trusted him. That trust kept him going. As Daniel's business slowly started to take shape, he also became more involved in his community. People who had known him as a quiet factory worker began to recognize him as a businessman. Some of his old friends came to visit the store and offered their support, while others simply stopped by to chat. It was strange, but Daniel didn't mind. He was getting used to the idea of being a part of something bigger than himself. The small clothing store opened its doors just a few months later. It wasn't a grand opening with bells and whistles, but Daniel didn't need that. The people of the town supported him, and he was grateful for every customer who walked through the door. He didn't make a fortune right away, but he didn't expect to. The satisfaction of seeing his dream come to life was enough to keep him motivated. And through it all, Laura was there. She would call every few weeks to check on him, offering advice and encouragement when he needed it. She never once pressured him to succeed, but the fact that she believed in him made all the difference. Daniel had come to realize that Laura's friendship, her trust, was worth more than any sum of money. But as time passed, Daniel began to notice something else about Laura's visits. She would always arrive at the most unexpected times, almost as if she were watching over him from afar. He didn't mind. It made him feel like he had someone in his corner, someone who truly cared about his success. However, there was a part of him that wondered why she continued to show up in his life. He knew she had a world of her own, filled with wealth, connections, and opportunities that far surpassed anything he could offer. Yet, she had chosen to stay involved in his life. One afternoon, as Daniel was working in the store, Laura came by for a surprise visit. She had been in town on business and decided to stop by. They sat together in the small back office, talking about everything and nothing. Laura was still the same warm and genuine person he had met that rainy night. It was hard for Daniel to believe that she was the heir to fortune, but there she was, sitting across from him like any other friend. "You've come a long way, Daniel," Laura said, her voice full of admiration. "I'm really proud of you." Daniel smiled, feeling a sense of pride that he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. "I couldn't have done it without you, Laura. You gave me the chance to start over. I just gave you the opportunity," she said. "You did the hard work. You're the one who made it happen." As they talked, Daniel couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. He had gone from being a struggling widower working 2 jobs to a businessman with a future. But it wasn't just about the money or the business. It was about the connection he had formed with Laura and the fact that someone had seen him for who he was, not just for what he had. It was something he had never truly experienced before. Later that year, with the store running smoothly and more customers coming in every day, Daniel's life had changed completely. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. And much of that was thanks to Laura. They continued to stay in touch, and as the years passed, their friendship deepened. Laura was no longer just a woman who had given him a chance. She had become someone Daniel truly cared about. Despite their differences in status, they had formed a bond that was built on mutual respect, kindness, and understanding. But life had a way of throwing unexpected twists, and Daniel's journey was far from over. The friendship he had built with Laura would continue to shape his life in ways he never imagined. And one day, it would lead him down a path that would test his resolve and change his life once more. Years passed, and Daniel's life seemed to be on a steady upward trajectory. His clothing store was a small but thriving business, and he found a sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced since Sophie's passing. Every day, he woke up excited about what he had built and grateful for the chance to finally live his dream. The small act of kindness he had shown Laura had snowballed into something much larger than he ever could have imagined. But even as things improved, there was a part of Daniel that couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was missing. He had achieved so much. He had the business he always wanted, a supportive community, and a solid group of friends. Yet, deep inside, there was still a void. He didn't realize at the time, but it wasn't a lack of material wealth or success that was bothering him. It was the absence of real connection. He spent countless hours at the store, pouring himself into his work. It was his way of staying busy, keeping his mind occupied, and avoiding the loneliness that sometimes crept up on him in the quiet moments. But there were days when he would catch himself looking out the window, remembering the nights when he had longed for companionship and the simple act of someone truly listening to him. His friendship with Laura remained a steady source of support, and she continued to check in regularly. But as much as Daniel appreciated her, he couldn't ignore the fact that their lives were vastly different. Laura lived in a world of luxury and privilege, while Daniel was just a small-town businessman trying to make ends meet. The disparity between their lives, although not something that caused any tension between them, was something Daniel had begun to think about more as time passed. One afternoon, Laura called Daniel out of the blue. She had just finished a business trip and wanted to catch up. Daniel was thrilled to hear from her, as always, and they arranged to meet at the store that evening. When Laura arrived, she was as warm and personable as ever. But this time, there was something different in her eyes, something that made Daniel curious. She had always been kind and down to earth, but today, she seemed more introspective. "Hey, Daniel," she greeted him with a smile. "I wanted to check in on you, see how everything's going." "Everything's good," Daniel replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her visit. "The store is doing well. I'm finally getting into a groove." "I'm glad to hear that," Laura said, but there was a hint of something else in her voice, something unspoken. She sat down across from him at the small table in his office, and Daniel could sense that she was hesitant to jump into whatever was on her mind. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Daniel, I know we've been through a lot together over the years, and I truly appreciate your friendship," she began, her tone sincere but heavy. "But I think it's time I tell you something important." Daniel looked at her, intrigued but slightly confused. "What is it, Laura?" "I've been living a life of privilege and wealth for as long as I can remember," she said, her eyes searching his face for understanding. "But recently I've been feeling a bit lost. I thought that money and status would bring happiness. But what I've realized is that it's not the things you have that matter. It's the people in your life and the connections you make." Daniel nodded, sensing where this conversation was going, but he didn't say anything. He just waited for her to continue. "I'm telling you this because I've come to a realization, and I need to make some changes," she said, her voice growing more determined. "I've spent my life focusing on business, wealth, and status, but I've missed out on genuine relationships like the one we have. I don't want to just be someone people know because of my name. I want to be known for who I am, for the person I've become." Daniel was taken aback by her honesty. He had always admired Laura for her grace and confidence, but now he was seeing another side of her, a side that was vulnerable and real. "So what are you saying?" Daniel asked, unsure what she was implying. "I'm saying that I want to step away from my family's business," Laura said, her decision clear. "I want to find a way to live a life that's more authentic to who I really am. I want to start fresh with real connections. And I think I want to do that here in this town with you." Daniel was stunned. He had never expected this. Laura, the heir to a multi-million-dollar fortune, was talking about stepping away from it all to build a life in a small town. It was unimaginable, and yet there she was, making this bold statement. "Laura, are you sure?" Daniel asked, his voice filled with concern. "This isn't something you can take lightly. You have so much to offer, your family, your wealth, your status. You've built an entire life on that. Laura smiled softly, a sense of peace in her eyes. "I built a life on something that doesn't fulfill me," she said. "I don't want to live for other people's expectations anymore. I want to live for myself and for the people who truly care about me." Daniel took a deep breath, trying to process everything she was saying. He admired her bravery, but he also knew that this decision would come with its own set of challenges. And yet, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the opportunity they both needed to grow together. Not as business partners or as people with different social standings, but as true friends who understood each other's struggles and dreams. Over the next few months, Laura gradually distanced herself from her family's business and embraced the simplicity of small-town life. She started volunteering at local charities, helping out at community events, and even getting involved in Daniel's clothing store. It wasn't long before the two of them formed an even deeper bond, one that was based not on wealth or status, but on shared values and mutual respect. And as the years went by, Daniel's small act of kindness on that rainy night continued to pay off in ways he never imagined. Not only had he fulfilled his lifelong dream of opening a clothing store, but he had also found a true friend in Laura, a friend who helped him realize that the best things in life weren't the material possessions he once dreamed of, but the genuine relationships he had built along the way. In the end, Daniel's journey wasn't just about achieving success. It was about finding meaning, love, and friendship in a world that often prioritized the wrong things. And as he looked back on his life, he knew that his greatest achievement wasn't the store he had built, but the connections he had made along the way. As time passed, Daniel's life continued to evolve in ways that he had never expected. The small clothing store that once felt like an unreachable dream became not just a success, but a symbol of his hard work, perseverance, and the kindness that had sparked it all. Every day, he walked into the store with a renewed sense of purpose. It was no longer just about making ends meet. It was about providing something meaningful to his community, a place where people could not only shop, but feel connected to the heart of the town. Laura, now fully immersed in her new life, had become a pillar of support for him. Her presence was a reminder that genuine relationships were far more valuable than any material possession. She had made the bold decision to leave behind the wealth and expectations of her family, to live a life that truly reflected who she was. And in doing so, she had inspired Daniel in ways he never thought possible. Though Laura's decision to step away from her family's empire had raised eyebrows among her wealthy circles, she didn't regret it for a moment. She had found peace, happiness, and a sense of fulfillment that had eluded her for so long. Every time she saw Daniel, she was reminded of the importance of making choices based on what truly matters: love, friendship, and authenticity. Together, they worked on the store, making small improvements, expanding its offerings, and ensuring that it continued to thrive. Laura, with her business acumen and Daniel's deep understanding of the local community, made a formidable team. They shared ideas, strategized for the future, and supported one another every step of the way. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about creating a legacy of compassion and connection. But even as the business grew, Daniel never lost sight of the lessons he had learned from that rainy night. He understood that success wasn't just about money or fame. It was about making a difference, both in his own life and in the lives of those around him. His story was a testament to the power of kindness, and he made sure to pass that message on to his customers and the people who supported him. One day, as Daniel was closing up the store, he found himself reflecting on everything that had happened since that fateful night he had given Laura a ride. He had lost his wife, but in doing so, he had gained a deep understanding of what truly mattered in life. The loss of Sophie had forced him to reevaluate everything, and it had ultimately led him to a place of peace and fulfillment. The quiet town that had once felt small and limiting now felt like home in a way it never had before. Daniel's relationships with the people in the community had deepened, and he had found true friends who supported him through the highs and lows of life. And then there was Laura, his closest friend, the person who had shown him that real connections could change everything. As he walked out of the store that evening, Daniel saw Laura approaching, a familiar smile on her face. She had just returned from a community meeting, and as always, she was eager to share the latest news. "How's the store doing?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "Better than ever," Daniel replied, smiling back at her. I can't believe how far we've come. It's been quite the journey, Laura said, her tone filled with warmth. But I'm proud of you, Daniel. You've built something that will last, not just because of the business, but because of the heart you've put into it. Thanks, Laura, Daniel said, his voice filled with gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you. The two of them stood there for a moment, silently appreciating the path they had taken together. Life had changed in ways they both hadn't expected, but looking back, neither of them would change a thing. The journey had been filled with challenges, but it had also been filled with joy, love, and meaningful connections. As the years passed, Daniel's clothing store became a staple in the town. It wasn't the biggest or the flashiest, but it was the most beloved. People didn't just come for the clothes. They came for the sense of community, for the knowledge that they were supporting a business that cared about them. Daniel had created something that transcended commerce. It was a place where people could come together, share their stories, and feel like they belonged. And through it all, Laura was by his side. Their bond had grown stronger with each passing year. And though they had come from completely different worlds, they had found a way to build a life together. Not as business partners, but as true friends who had helped each other become the best versions of themselves. Daniel never forgot that rainy night when he had given a ride to a stranded woman. He often thought about how a simple act of kindness could lead to something so extraordinary. That one decision had changed his life forever, and in the end, it had led him to everything he had ever wanted: community, connection, and the fulfillment of a dream. As he looked out at the town that had become his home, Daniel felt at peace. His journey wasn't about the success he had achieved, but the relationships he had built along the way. And as he stood there, looking out at the life he had created, he realized that sometimes the greatest rewards come not from what we have, but from the people we meet and the kindness we share. Thank you, Laura, Daniel whispered to himself, knowing that he would never have gotten here without her. And so, Daniel's story came full circle. A small act of kindness had led to a life of purpose, connection, and fulfillment. It was a reminder to all of us that sometimes the simplest gestures can lead to the most profound changes.